Okay, great. As we try to process all that is happening in the world around us, there's no place I'd rather be than here where we can encourage each other, listen to each other, listen for God, pray, and sing together. As we join you from this particular place and this particular land, we acknowledge that the land was traditionally stewarded by the Lenape people. May we nurture our relationship with the land and with our indigenous siblings. A few accessibility reminders. If you're on Zoom, there is an option for closed captioning if it would be helpful to see the words at the bottom of your screen. And then for people in the sanctuary, there is water and glasses here. It's going to be a hot day, so try to get near a fan and please take care of yourselves so that we can be safe. And congratulations to all of you for adjusting to the new worship time, 10 a.m. You're all here. We're so glad that you are. We're going to sing our opening hymn. In the meantime, I'd like you to be thinking about if you'd like to lead our opening sentences. I would love someone on Zoom to do the leader part and someone in the sanctuary to do the people part. So if you're interested in doing that, please let Care know so that we'll be able to unmute you when the time comes. Our opening hymn is De Colores in the New Century Hymnal, the black one at the end of your pews, number 402, and then the words will also be on the screen. Here, I'm wondering if we have a volunteer to read the leader part of our opening sentences. I think I see Becky. Great. And then in the sanctuary, you can bring the handheld. Dan? This is adapted from In Flesh. Please join in the sanctuary and at home for the people part.
God is an invitation, a lure. I can't hear the sanctuary. A chance to do things differently. I'm sorry, I can't hear the sanctuary. Maybe you need to read over there.
Hear us now.
Yes. Okay. I guess I should probably start over. I'm sorry. God is an invitation, a lure.
A chance to do things differently.
Always before us.
God is the possibility of collective change.
There are everyday, ordinary patterns of living disguise evil and cover over sins of power.
God makes known what is hidden, calls us to courage, makes us capable of radical solidarity.
We are not left powerless.
Every day there are openings.
Every day, a chance to choose what is right.
Every day an opportunity to repattern the world.
Amen.
Amen.
We'll try this. Our act of praise is in the binders. If you're using the music in the hymnals, it's in the binders, number 7, and the words will be on the screen as well.
Wondering if we have some kids who might want to join me on the steps, and whether we have any kids on Zoom for our time with children. How are you? Oh, I want to sound the same. Hi, Juniper. How are you? Is this the first time you've been in the sanctuary in a little bit? Welcome back. Hi, Zinnia. How are you? It's so good to see you both. Is there something you'd like to share about what's been going on with you lately?
I graduated from kindergarten, but I didn't get to go. But today I get to have a graduation party.
At your house? That is so exciting. In case you didn't hear, we have a kindergarten graduate. Yay! But the double dip part about that is that you missed some of your school celebrations for that, but you're gonna make up for it by having a rad party at home with friends and family. That is so exciting. I hope it's the best day ever. You got really good weather for it, and we're so proud of your accomplishment. That's awesome. And how are you? Is there anything you want to say in there? Do you want to say hi? Well, one new addition to our sanctuary setup is that we have a craft table in the back set up for kids who might want to do an art project while you're listening. So you should know that everything up there is up for grabs if you feel like sitting back there and making some kind of art project while you sit in church today, okay? We're so glad you're here. Do we have any, we don't have any Zoom children, chronological children, but we are so glad that you're here with us today. And we hope you enjoy the day, and we can't wait to hear about your graduation party afterwards. Thanks, Juniper. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being here, Zinnia. Welcome, welcome. Thank you so much. A few announcements and reminders in the name of good communication. I want to start off by reminding you that today is Communion Sunday. So if you're at home, that means it's BYOB, bring your own bread and cup. So if you haven't already gathered those elements, please do that so that we can be in communion together shortly. Other announcements, things going on that you should know about. We want to thank our worship team this morning. Melinda is doing our tech. Michelle jumped in and is doing our camera. We so appreciate that last minute help. Care is our usher. Becky is our greeter. And we appreciate you all and couldn't do it without you, so thank you. Many thanks to the panelists who are going to talk today. And, you know, this is part of our Pride celebration, so you're going to get to hear from members of our community who are just going to be in discussion with each other and with us, and we so appreciate those volunteers, so thank you for that. As a reminder, I just want to mention our COVID protocols. We're trying to figure it out, but for now, everybody is masked unless you're part of the service, in which case you test that day, so it's okay to be without a mask. That's how we're doing it so far. If you have feedback about that, feel free to let us know. But just so you know that the panelists have tested so that they can be unmasked so that you can hear them better. Our annual congregational meeting is today immediately following worship. We'll take a 10-minute break and then come back on, and it'll be the first time we're doing it hybrid. So we hope you can stick around. There'll be some voting on our budget, on our slate of leaders. We have some guests who we'll introduce later from each denomination. We're so excited for this time when we can be thinking about our future together and what kind of church we want to be. Trustees are meeting this Wednesday at 7 p.m. on Zoom. On July 10th, we're going to have a fun fundraiser. It'll be an ice cream social, and there'll be some yard games, and you can make your own sundaes, and it'll be pay what you can, pay what you want, but it'll be a way for us to make a few dollars and also to have community connection, most importantly. If you're planning for summer travels, it's never too early to collect water to bring back for our baptismal font for the service that happens outside in September. So please collect water from wherever you might go, and it can also just be from your home or local. If worship facilitation is your ministry, we need volunteers for all those roles that we just gave shout outs for. So please consider whether you could pitch in some way. And then if you want more information about committees, today we'll talk about some of that during our congregational meeting. but also you could always send an email to church council if you have specific feedback or questions. Any other announcements for the good of the group? Oh, I remembered one. Tomorrow at 7 p.m., you may have received an email to let you know that we are gathering both in person and on Zoom to have a service of lament and prayer related to the Supreme Court ruling. So if you are feeling raw and need a space to be in community with other people, we invite you to join us either in person or on Zoom tomorrow at 7. Thank you.
We may have a dead mic there. And this one is. Okay. So we're having summer. It's the summer gremlins. They're hitting us all at the same time, right in time for summer. We're going to have a panel discussion, as Priscilla just mentioned. I'm going to and the panel, I think, will just pass this back and forth. One thing we've forgotten to mention is there's ice water here. If anyone here in the sanctuary is warm and we want you to stay hydrated, feel free to come over at any point. There's some glasses here and some water there. So keep yourself comfortable and cool. We will be hearing from a panel that has grown to a 5th member since we put the bulletin together. So Terry Roberts, Rachel Walton, Julia Cease is going to take part of it. Emery Carter, I saw Emery, and Care will be part of that online. This is going to be a group of folks talking to us out of their experiences of living in the intersection of queerness and Christianity. So we're grateful for your willingness to come share your experiences with us today. We start with a first reading that is a video. It's a poet talking about. Well, I'll let her say what it is, and then we'll hear our scripture reading for this morning.
In which my queer friends find out I am Christian, and my Christian friends find out I am queer. Hey. I didn't ask for this, but I'm tired of hacking pieces of myself off for you, warm and bloody. See here, my still beating heart, the way it speeds when she walks in the room, the way it calms when I sit in the pew. I don't make the rules. Only know I love who I love, a woman and a God, and telling either of you makes me Solomon's baby, torn between two hands that do not want all of me, cutting myself in half to be what you want. I read poetry at an event because I'm queer. The perimeter was picketed by people who would call themselves my brothers and sisters if they did not know all of me. A line of righteous indignation I had to walk through to say my name out loud, as if I am not crossing my own picket line every Saturday night spent dancing with girls and every Sunday morning spent on kneelers. Here, I call myself Christian like an apology. I know the fear that word causes, how many screams have been muffled between the pages of a Bible, how the history of Christianity is bound in human skin, what it means when I call them my family, part of my body, the other place I've made a home. I'm not here to convert you. I cannot tell you your salvation lies anywhere that does not want all of you, and Christians have told us for so long they do not want us. I'm no crusader. I don't come to you with swords or wrath or gospel or truth. All I have is open hands, this bridge for a spine, and the conviction that there is no such thing as us and them when both can be found in me, the prodigal daughter.
Now, our scripture reading for the day comes from the letter of 1 John, chapter 4. Beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God, and whoever loves is born of God and knows God. The one who does not love does not know God, for God is love. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. For fear has to do with punishment, and the one who fears is not perfected in love. We love because God first loved us. If anyone says, I love God, and hates a brother or sister, that one is a liar. For they do not love their brother or sister whom they have seen. For they who do not love their brother or sister whom they have not seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. In this commandment we have from God that the one who loves God should also love their brother or sister. This is God's good news.
All right, yeah. Okay, yeah, that looks pretty good. Okay, I just want to make sure Care can see us. We did test and get negative tests. Emory did not have a chance, so they'll be leaving their mask on. Good morning, everybody. I wanted to just kind of pull together a group of people to just, within the confines of the 15 to 20 minutes that we have, just kind of give a background of where we're coming from, any experiences we've had, and then kind of what it means to us to have a church like Chestnut Hill where we can feel safe and accepted, and we're welcome to come up and talk to people about who we are. So that's kind of what we're doing today. I forgot my phone that has the questions on it. The first question, we were going to just do like a little 2 to 3 minutes, you know, background. If you could give your name for anyone that doesn't know your name, give your name, give your pronouns, and then maybe just spend a couple minutes talking about the religious upbringing that you might have had or not have had, and then when you realized that you fell under the LGBTQ umbrella. So I'm going to give this to Rachel while I get my phone.
Hello, I'm Rachel. Pronouns are she and they. It's such a big question. I grew up in the evangelical church, and I think my biggest experience of what that was like was, in terms of LGBTQ, was an absence of it. We weren't talked about. We didn't exist for the most part. I think I remember a couple times, like, there were news pieces that came across, but there was no mention of the fact that thousands of people were dying of AIDS or what that meant, and you know, the impact on people. So it was just this background thing, and the church didn't address it. I think it was best, like the thinking was just don't talk about it, and then maybe we won't have this problem. So it wasn't until much later in my life that I realized, oh, I have these other feelings, and I didn't have the right things to call it, so it was really hard to talk with anybody about what that meant. So it was kind of this big question mark for a really long time.
Hello, I'm Emery, they, them. I grew up in specifically a Presbyterian church that did not allow women to preach. So, yeah, and, but sort of the same thing. It was like very rarely brought up. A few times, like, sexuality was brought up and like sort of like it's a sin, blah blah blah. And I think literally only once growing up did I hear about trans people in the church, and it was like a small group that was like, it wasn't even like in the church itself. Like literally my mom did not tell me her brother was gay until I was in middle school, and she wasn't even telling me. Another person in youth group had asked her her opinion on gay people, and so she started out saying, well, my brother is gay, and I'm like, when was I gonna learn this? But yeah, it was just sort of like, again, just very much swept under the rug, just like, oh, it's a sin, and we're just gonna leave it at that.
Hi, I'm Julie. She, her, although sometimes pronouns make me a little uncomfortable. I'm not exactly sure what I want to say. But I grew up in a very fundamentalist Christian, almost like cultish background. My parents were missionaries in Africa, and I lived there till I was 17. Then I went to a Christian college. So I was very isolated, and I didn't really know, I don't think I knew, well, I didn't know that I knew any gay people all that time. Except for one missionary who were like dismissed and had to go back to America because the husband had done something terrible, and my parents said it was worse than cheating on his wife, and we just didn't know what could possibly be worse than cheating on his wife. But I learned many years later he was gay. But anyways, I have a lot of wounds from my church background, and even coming into this church, as friendly and rainbow adorned as it is still a little bit painful. So I'm sort of still wounded, but looking to not let hateful people be the sole inheritors of God and religion. So I want to be part of that conversation with my family, and you see my two beautiful children here. We're really happy to have this experience for them.
And Kara, you want to go?
Hi, can you hear me okay? I'm Kara Messner. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a queer trans man. I grew up, I don't like this word, but as a shorthand, I grew up unchurched. We attended a United Church of Canada very briefly, and then we sort of stopped. And then I church hopped a bit as a young adult. And if I landed anywhere, it was with the Quakers, but I wasn't really deeply involved. And then it was really coming out. I came out twice as a genderqueer lesbian, and then as a trans man, and much later. When I came out as lesbian, that actually led me to church, to a Metropolitan Community Church in New York, which was very queer. And that was part of my coming out process. So for me, my sexuality and my Christianity have always been very intertwined. But I will say that even having grown up unchurched, I think that's a really problematic word. I'm not sure why I keep naming it here. I somehow picked up through osmosis that all the stuff, like I thought I was going to hell when I came out. So even though I didn't go to church and didn't explicitly hear those messages, I had absorbed them from somewhere. Yeah, so just resonance with what other folks are sharing.
So the next question, Kara kind of touched on. So when did you come out, and what messages did you get, if any, if you want to talk about that? What was the reaction to from the people in your lives, family, or people in your church, if you were in one? Anything you want to say about that? And let's go in reverse order, if that's okay. Kara, do you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, I kind of spoke about that a bit, but I guess I would say I was at theater school when I came out, and in one of my plays, I joke about that, like coming out as queer in theater school in New York City is a good way to do it. um, so that was a good space to do that, and the church I was attending at that time, and where I eventually trained to become a minister. Um, was also a really important part of that. So I was lucky in that sense. There were people from the older history of my life that had their own journeys with my sexuality, and eventually in my 50s with my gender identity as well, and that's been pretty varied. Um, so yeah, so I feel fortunate to have come out in a space where it was welcomed and encouraged. But as I say, I was still nonetheless in my mid-20s, like really wrestling with a lot of the messages I had just sort of absorbed from the world around me, and kind of had to do a lot of deep sort of spiritual and emotional and therapeutic work to figure a lot of that stuff out.
Thanks.
So I'm not sure I ever really came out in the way that people talk about. I, like I said, I started out in a very isolated, kind of cultish perspective on life. And then when I went to college, my parents were still living in Africa, so I was kind of alone in the world. I went to a very conservative Christian college, and I felt like it was so liberal that I was going to go to hell every time I went to class. And you know, we had small conversations about somewhat open-minded things about, oh, maybe God isn't a man, you know, little things like that that really blew my mind at that point. And I always felt like the sky was going to fall on me for even thinking these thoughts. And I think by the time I got married to a man right out of college, and you know, a couple of years passed, and it wasn't until law school when I actually met a lesbian, and had never felt that kind of like chemistry between people, and I realized all of a sudden what like romance was about, where I had just thought it was kind of boring beforehand. So that was like my personal experience. But as far as coming out, I think I had gone through so many micro steps to get away from the like really restrictive thinking, that by the time I got to that point, I was just like, all right, I'm going to hell anyway. It doesn't really matter. Just add this to the list. And my parents were still in Africa at that point, and were fairly, I hadn't communicated with them for years, because every time I did, it was a really unfortunate situation. So I didn't tell them, and they didn't find out till years later. And my dad was actually dying of cancer, and my mom guessed that the friend that I had brought home for Christmas for 3 years was like maybe more than a friend. And and she said, well, don't tell your dad, I'd rather he just die peacefully. So that was that. But anyways, my dad did, when he died, right before he died, he said he was really proud of me, and he never mentioned specifically you know, that, but he just said, I'm really proud of you, and there's nothing I'm disappointed in. So I think he kind of knew anyways.
So, as I mean, the thing with coming out is it's never like one and done. You're like coming out to a lot of different groups about a lot of different things. As far as my sexuality, I'm asexual and aromantic, which basically means I'm not interested in a sexual or romantic relationship with anyone. And like, basically, you know, in high school I was very much like, oh, I'm just like not ready for that yet. And then, you know, once I was like, you know, an actual adult, I was like, I started being like, yeah, I sort of just phrased it as, I don't really want to get married. And, you know, it was really interesting because, like, my mom was, you know, if your kids just never brought anyone home for like 20 years, you're sort of like, yeah, this is expected. But, you know, it's sort of like with purity culture, being aro-ace is like really easy as a kid, because it's like really easy not to have sex before marriage if you just don't want to have sex. But then you're an adult, and suddenly it's like, when are you going to get married? When are you going to start dating? It's like, no, we're not going to talk about that. And then, like, with my dad, he literally, and this was like after I was kind of open about the fact I just don't want to have a relationship with anyone, blah, 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 blah. He basically at one point said to me something along the lines of like, you know, if it wasn't for you having social anxiety, you might have a good Christian boyfriend by now. Which I was not happy with him about. And then as far as gender, I sort of, truthfully, this was like the first public place I ever, like that wasn't like a single person that I actually was like open about gender-wise. But since then, I've been pretty open, like, it's on my Facebook. I made a post on Facebook about the fact that I'm taking testosterone, and I changed my name on there. Like, it's pretty, out there now. And I did that in like early December, and this was the first Christmas I did not spend with my dad. And thankfully, he has calmed down from having a tantrum since then, but the relationship still isn't the same. It definitely is hard. Like, it's sort of like it was both hard before and after being open in like different ways.
So when I was growing up, I think some people suspected I was queer because I never really showed a lot of interest in boys. I really enjoyed hanging out with boys and doing boy things, but not in the romantic sense. But I was just me. It didn't click that this was anything specific. I only learned like 5 years ago that labels and pieces in my head started falling into place because I'm sort of outside of some of the usual terms. I'm non-binary, which means I just don't have a real strong connection with either male or female. I'm demisexual, which is on the asexual spectrum, and I'll just explain because a lot of people don't know about it, but it's kind of like I don't experience like a lot of the primary attractions that people experience with each other when they first meet. A lot of people, when they meet each other, they get that sense of physical attraction or attraction to somebody's voice or just something that comes across right away. I can appreciate the aesthetics of that, but it doesn't click with me. I have to experience the emotional connection to experience sexual interest. So like, most people experience both, like both are important, but I don't get those first initial cues, which just made it really hard to figure out who I was because I didn't have anybody to compare it to growing up. And then I guess I really came out about 5 years ago. I was basically playing out a really cheesy B movie of a mess life because I had been this like stable person for so long, and then finally all these things clicked together and like I needed to fall apart. I had also gotten married right after college, and it was not a relationship that worked. It worked on some levels, but not others. And so I got divorced and then came out around the same time. And it was too much for my church that I was going to at the time, which was really frustrating because the church liked to talk about being there with you in the mess. God is there with you in the mess. But then when my life was finally a mess after being stable, they pushed me out. So that was happening. And then on a more like individual level, like one of the first questions that I got when I came out to my family was, where are you with God? And like that poet was talking about, it's that sense that, oh, can you really be a Christian and queer? Like, is that possible? So it was it was so strange having that question, because I've been like, I grew up in the church, I've been part of churches all my life, and suddenly, because I'm finally figuring out things about myself, like everything's called into question.
Thanks. We got a question submitted to us from a church member, and I want to make sure we hit that. The question is, at what age or at what point does someone know or understand their own sexuality? And I chuckled when I got this question, because I was like, well, if you figure it out, let me know. Like, but if anyone has any ideas on that, I'm going to start with Rachel. We'll go back in reverse order. Yeah.
I touched on it a little bit because, yeah, 5 years ago, so I was late 30s. You don't, like, there's no set time frame. Some people figure it out when they're really small, and some people figure it out much, much later because it's complicated. We are all complex. Our genders and sexualities are all complex. Like, some people have easier labels to apply to that. But for some people, it takes a while for something to click and to figure out things about themselves. So there's no time frame.
Yeah, I didn't really put a label on anything until I was in my early 20s. But like, that was just because that's when I realized that the labels existed and applied to me. Literally, when I texted one of my friends that I was trans, they were like, oh, I've been like waiting for this news for the last like 6 years. And like, it's the sort of thing. I was in 7th grade the first time a stranger thought I wasn't a girl, and that instance was so important to me that I remember that moment now that I'm like in like 27. And in high school, literally my friends joked that for Halloween I should come dressed up as a girl. So again, it's sort of like there's a difference between when the signs start showing and when you figure it out. But as far as like just like when it can happen, if you have the labels, I'm very much of the belief if a child is old enough to, like, you would expect the child to understand what gender there are, or like at what age a child would start usually having a crush on someone of the other gender. It is perfectly possible that they would then be like, oh, actually I have a crush on someone of the same gender, or actually I don't like the gender I'm assigned with. It's just like having the words for it.
So I think that sexuality is really a complicated intersection of the personal and the cultural norms. First of all, why is it even such a topic? In many cultures, sex is utilitarian or private, and we don't have to know each other's sexuality. It's just a little odd that it's such a big topic here in America. Western culture is really expected to be these primarily sexual beings. So I don't know when people define their own sexuality, and I don't have any comment on me personally. It just kind of is like part of life. But I think a lot of it is also tied up in gender norms and how you relate to other people, and that is like predominantly pushed upon us by the culture. So it just, it's sometimes a reaction of how you want to interact with other people and what label other people then put on you for that.
And Karen?
Yeah, I'm appreciating what everyone has said, and I don't want to sort of repeat, but I guess I'll just maybe state the obvious here and say that when we're talking about sexuality and gender, we're talking about two different things, and they intersect. And we often talk about LGBTQ, and so we kind of lump them together, but they are two different things. And I guess also just to name that especially with what's going on right now in our country around life-saving healthcare for trans youth, just to say that research, I don't want to get all teachery here, but this is like my work, like research shows that some trans children begin to understand their identity as early as 5 or 6 years old. And so this idea that children can't know, I'm kind of connecting a little bit with what Emery said. I think this idea that children are too young to understand or too young to know just isn't borne out in what's actually happening and what the research shows. So yeah, and that feels like that's very recently not very recently, but it's more recently gotten even more politicized, and trans youth are now sort of another political football. So it just feels important to sort of name that piece as well. For me, I didn't figure it out I didn't figure my sexuality out till my mid-20s. I didn't figure out my gender identity. Well, that was a kind of a 30-year process. But I think, was it Emery? Somebody talked about sort of the signs. Maybe it was Rachel. You know, I look back now and I can see all kinds of signs through childhood. I just didn't know what they meant. I had no frame of reference.
Yeah, I think that's a great call out, because it's a constantly evolving thing, like, because people are always changing, but then also trying to understand how you're feeling compared to like the things you've been told. It's like, well, like I had to get past this whole, well, I'm a Christian, so I can't be queer. And it's like, okay, well, let's get rid of that. If that's not true, then what actually am I? And then you can start to do that work and kind of see things for what they actually are. So I think it's a constant process. I'm with Rachel right now, so I'm assuming, you know, I'm into women, but I don't know. It's okay not to have all the answers. And then I know we're short on time, but there's one last topic I think it's important that we address, and that's on allies and how, oh, it just closed. But basically how, what it means to be in a church like this, and how people in the church can be better allies, and what that means. And Care, do you want to start us off with that?
Sure. And just for those of you who aren't seeing the chat, I'm just going to share that, if it's okay, Ovid popped something in the chat saying the support group Ovid facilitates for trans children at the CHOP Gender Clinic starts at age 4. So that kind of underscores what we were just talking about. Allyship. I had this, and this probably isn't an epiphany for some of you, but I had this epiphany a few years ago when one of my queer colleague activist friends in British Columbia said that allyship is not something we can claim for ourselves. Like, we don't get to decide if we are the ally of a particular group of people. It's something that is given to us. So I don't get to decide if I'm a good ally to BIPOC folks. They get to decide if I'm worthy of that title. And that was a real shift for me. And it's gotten me thinking a lot in my own life about how I try to work towards being an ally with different groups of people and different individuals. And it's also gotten me thinking about, how do I ask folks to be an ally to me as a queer trans man? I think I love conversations like these ones where folks are being brave and sharing their stories. And I also feel like part of allyship is inviting each of us to do our own learning and our own educating, and not to simply expect the trans or LGBTQ folks in our lives to educate us. We have the internet now. We have such amazing resources. So doing our own self-educating as well. Around the trans piece specifically, getting beyond just trying to get name and pronouns right. And when we make mistakes, actively practicing so that we don't keep making the same mistake. And I'll be honest and say that's, especially when I was attending Chestnut Hill in person, that was something I struggled with sometimes, and probably still would if I was there in person, that folks would misgender me more than once. And that's the painful thing when that happens. So just, I guess, inviting folks to really kind of do their own work. And for me, it's about calling people in with love into that work, myself included.
So for me, starting with the poet we heard earlier on in the service, and echoing through all of our comments, you hear that we have left things behind, or we've been forced to choose identities and choose friends and groups of people because we've been excluded from certain groups, and a couple of us have mentioned family as well. So I just want you guys to know you're the group that we came to when we were excluded from other groups or our families. And when we talk about needing family and needing support, sometimes you are the only thing or the only group. And it's just, I think, be aware that your queer friends have lost a lot and have maybe not that kind of support. So it's hard these days to build a chosen family. So just be aware that we may have less grandmother visits or whatever else there may be.
I think for me, and this is both like saying, like, both something to work on and something I've noticed is like learning, sort of unlearning to assume, like, you're not always going to know, sort of one of the reasons why it took me so long to understand everything is it was sort of like, oh, because I wasn't dating someone of my own gender, then I must be straight, which was not the case. I just didn't want to date anyone. But like, it's the sort of thing, one of the things I liked when I was thinking about it that I like about this church is I'm pretty sure this is the first time I've mentioned what my sexuality is publicly, because it's sort of like, you don't need to sort of just be like, hi, here's everything about me. But I don't feel like anyone here, I've ever been asked by anyone at the church about like, oh, are you dating who are you, are you dating? When are you getting married? Like, that's like never been asked. And when that was, well, if I was still at my own church, that would probably be asked way too often, even if I was like, no, I'm not. So like, and I guess also sort of like a extra bonus is like, sort of like exploring one's sexuality and gender should not just be for queer folks. Like, you can like explore and sort of play, like mess around with like gender expression, stuff like that, even if, it's sort of like worst case scenario, you're just more assured that you are the gender that you are or the sexuality that you are, but you still learn stuff in the process.
Yes. We came here to this church because it was open and affirming. There was like a rainbow flag on the webpage. And it kind of feels like, I don't know, like a cheesy reason to choose the church, but when, in the sense of like looking for the flag, but that is what brought us here. Because when we found ourselves in a position of needing to find a church that we could be comfortable at, there's a lot of churches that say all are welcome, and it's a bait and switch. You come in and they're happy to have you there and welcoming, but like not about that. So we have to be explicit about our beliefs, and I'm glad that this church was and is, and I hope continues to be. Everybody else has made good points. I just wanted to say that from my own experience, one of the biggest things that I experienced when I came out was silence. I poured my heart out to a lot of people, and there was no response, and there were no questions. So some people get too many. I didn't get any, and it felt really awful. Like, it was such a cold feeling for a long time where I felt very isolated and alone, and like I didn't know who my friends were. I didn't know what my family felt. And it would have meant so much to me if people just talked to me and asked me questions about myself. I know some people are more private and they don't want to talk about this stuff, but I mean, they can say that. Like, I think it means a lot to be like, what's your story? You don't have to understand us perfectly to ask genuine questions and want to get to know us. Like that, it just means the world when people actually do that.
So that's all our questions that we're going to talk about. I just want to say thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Emery. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Care, for doing. Thank you for being a part of this and for being willing to talk in this kind of forum. It's not easy, but it's really appreciated. So thank you so much for doing it. And I'm just going to close with, in our last Rainbow Connection meeting that we had with Linda, we asked her for advice that she had for us moving forward. And her advice was to try to see the people on the margins. So whoever they are, queer, BIPOC, just a new person in general, look for the people that are on the margins and try to include them in some way. Make them feel accepted, because unless you go out, like what Rachel is saying, if you're silent, then we don't know where you stand. We don't know where you fall on that. So let us know, and let people on the margins know where you stand. Thank you.
That was surely the good news of God, and I feel that you all were able to both go deep, and I know that we only scratched the surface, and so I'm so glad to be in community with you so that we can continue our connections. Thank you for that invitation and for your bravery in sharing part of your stories. At this time, we will continue our worship through our giving. We will put on the screen some reminders about ways that you can continue to support our ministries. We're so grateful at this time for the generosity of this church. We sent out an email at some point saying we had a budget gap, and people stepped up and gave more, and so we're so appreciative of that. Some of the ways that you can give will be on the screen. You can do that via text. You can mail it to our address, or you can give online. And of course, when you come to the sanctuary, we pass the bowl, so that's another way to give. We do remind you that if you are new or want to be part of our email list, in your bulletin, there is a card that allows you to put your contact information and or prayer requests. So that's something else that we invite you to put into the bowl.
Thank you, Jaime. And our song offering response, if you're using the books in the pews, it's the black one, the New Century Hymnal, number 370, 370. We'll sing the fourth verse. You can also read it off the screen. I invite you to stand in body or spirit as we sing together. This gift we now bring, this present, this token, these words can convey the joy of this day. When grateful we come, remembering, rejoicing, this song we now offer in honor and praise. You may be seated. And we'll be using these books for those of you in the sanctuary who want to use books. Everything will also be up on the screen.
At this time, you are invited. For you, this is the bread.
We'll give you the cup, and then I'll bring the tray back around.
For you, Kevin. For you, Tony, this is the bread. For you, Columbus. For you, this is the bread. This is the bread of God. For you, Columbus. This is the bread of God. This is the bread of God. For you. This is the bread of life. I'll be back. This is the bread of life. Carrie, this is the bread of life. Caleb, for you, this is the bread of life. See the cup of the life.
And is there someone who would be willing to close this circle in a prayer on the microphone so that the people online can also share in it?
Gracious God, we thank you for this holy mystery in which you have given yourself to each one of us. We pray, oh God, that you will continue to grant us strength to run on and see what the end will bring. Thank you for this body that is here today and those that are on the screen online. We know that you are omnipresent, so you are here as well as wherever they are at this very moment. Thank you again for your spirit in this place. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. And I invite you all to find your seats again. And in the hymnal are the words for our closing hymn. They'll be up on the screen as well. I will say this hymn is going to be a little bit of an act of faith for us all, because the music that we have for it, the congregational singing version is a little bit, and now I can't even, the congregational singing version, the music is a little bit different from what Jaime has to play from, and doesn't include the last part of the song. So those words are printed on the inserts in your bulletin, and we're going to follow along with the piano and hope that I do a good job leading it. And I invite you all to stand in body or spirit as we sing together, A Child of God. No matter what people say or think about me, I am a child, I am a child of God. No matter what people say or think about you, you are a child, you are a child of God. No matter what the world says or thinks about me, I am a child, I am a child of God. No matter what the church says, decisions, pronouncements on you, you are a child, you are a child of God. And take this next part on faith. And there is nothing or no one who can separate. They can't separate you from the truth that you're someone, you are family, you are meant to be a child of God. You are a child of God. We walk by faith and sometimes sing the wrong notes, but there we go. Go from this place in peace. A reminder, we'll take a short break for those who are able to stay for our congregational meeting here and online. Go from this place in peace, knowing that you are indeed a child of God.